So do you guys have any thoughts about the BMAT, what you did to prepare, how you found the exam, etc.?
Yeah, so there were 3 sections. The first one about more like critical thinking. The second section was science. And the last one is an essay. And they give you 4 options. Because the science was, you have to know your GCSE science pretty much inside out. So that's including chemistry, biology and physics. And also GCSE maths. But I think one thing to note is that I made sure I printed out the specification, because what you necessarily learn in GCSEs, there might actually be more that you need to know. And I think on their website they do have a guide which you can use, so I definitely used that. And past papers is definitely the obvious thing that I used.
Yep, so on the topic of the specification for section 2, I found that not only was there a lot of GCSE content which wasn't in the actual specification, there's also just 1 or 2 things which, oddly enough, from the AS syllabus managed to make their way into the BMAT.
Yeah.
So I think, from what I recall, things like mass spectrometry and chemistry, that's something that you learn generally in the first few weeks of AS.
Yeah.
That's probably why they feel comfortable putting that into the syllabus there. It's quite interesting.
Yeah.
What about the other sections? Did you do anything to prepare for section 3, for example? Did you write some essays timed?
Yeah, I looked at like a lot of examples, and then I just like, if I didn't have time to constantly write a full essay on each thing, I would just do bullet points of that title. So that way I could get through loads of essay titles and have an idea of what to write. But you do also need to sit down and practice for half an hour, just write an essay. And I also did like a lot of research into random things like medical ethics. I made sure I know the 4 principles. And that helped me in my exam.
Yeah, same here. I think the most important thing for me was to plan. So I used to spend about like a good 10, maybe nearly 15 minutes to plan and organize, because writing, you can speed that up with practice. So if you've done enough essays, you can write your content easily, but having your thoughts organized, because you only have 30 minutes and 1 page to write on. So if you have your thoughts organized beforehand, so it's easier to write quickly.
Yeah, so the key with section 3 is you're not going to be pushed for time to write a full page in half an hour. Well, if you are, then you're in for deep trouble when you go to university or whatever else. The difficulty is putting something together which is cohesive, has a logical argument, has something in the introduction that you make the point all the way through, and that's quite difficult. That takes some practice.
Yeah, and they've got like a standard mark scheme they use for BMAT essays. Though it sounds generic what's in the top band, one little thing I did was that at the beginning of the paper for the real BMAT essay exam, I wrote just a couple of like main words, key words from the mark scheme, like concise, clear, and I don't actually remember the exact words. So that basically every time I wrote a sentence, I made sure that actually added something to my essay. Sure. I think one of the key things to remember for section 1 is that if you've got like a long passage and then a question and then the multiple choice answers, first read the question before looking at the passage, because the passage is huge and you're going to waste so much time if you read that first, because you might see the question and realise you don't actually need to understand the passage, just find the key words and that can lead you to the answer, and that will speed up time.
Also, if you, for example, read that the question's asking you about a flaw in the argument, you'll have that in the back of your head as you read through. I'm looking for flaws, I'm looking for something that, turns my nose up as I read it, raises my eyebrows, and then I'll look for that in the set of 5 answers.
Yeah, it's like purposeful reading, so it becomes more efficient.
And there are also some logical thinking puzzles. Is there any way that you think you can prepare for those? I think one of the good ways I remembered is just honing my mental math skills. If I remember, if I have to think about what 8 times 7 is, I'm going to run into issues.
Because you have no calculator either.
Yeah.
I think one thing I did, because for me section 1 was like the weakest section, I made sure that I also did TSA papers, because their paper 1 is pretty much exactly the same as the section 1 for BMAT, except it's a bit longer, so you might want to think about that with the timing. But that's really good as well. So I did a lot of those as well as all the BMAT past papers, because actually you will get through them quicker than you think.
So how much time did you guys prepare for the actual exam? I know there's like generally a half-term holiday just before. So did you do anything before that? Do you think there's a need to do anything before that?
I did do stuff before that, like after school I tried to fit in some time. But if I'm honest, I think saving a good 3 weeks should be enough. I had a 2 weeks half term, which I think was like plenty of time, and I think that was really useful. But I think it really depends per person. It depends like how quick it will take you to learn the GCSE science content. Depends what your true weakness is. Is it section 1? Is it the essay? So I think you need to figure that out yourself. But I'd say at least 3 weeks, at least. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, same. Along with the half term, I also, before that, I also went to my physics teacher because I hadn't taken physics for A-levels. So yeah, I used to go after school and she used to help me with that section.
Because there's some tricky things like, for example, transformers and the equations involved, or the equations involved in, series of resistors in parallel and things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, we're all applying for medicine, so you might not think that's immediately pertinent, so you might not have that at the forefront of your mind. But 6 to 8 questions will be on biology, chemistry and physics.
Yeah.
There is no favouring of biology and chemistry over physics, so you have to know your physics.
And often the physics questions are you need calculations, you need to know your maths as well. And like formulas, definitely, I think, I remember learning a lot of physics formulas. And one thing I did was that every time I got a question wrong, I would write down the answer and the question on a different sheet of paper, and like the week before the exam sort of thing, that's what I was flicking through.
Sure. So when you do your past papers, make sure that you've actually kept a record of all of your answers, all your correct answers, all your wrong answers. Because if you could just flick through like a stapled sheet of all of your wrong answers, you're more likely to identify where the weaknesses are.
Key thing is to work on your mistakes and actually really try and work out where they went wrong, especially in like section 1, because the technique is very repetitive for that section. So
the good thing to remember about BMAT is that they do give the answers. They do give a list of answers, so options A through E or whatever. But often if you don't know how to do the question, just having a letter A through E doesn't really help. So if you know someone else who's applying for medicine in the same year, or someone that's done BMAT before, it's really helpful to get their take on how to go through a question, because sometimes you can just be staring at it and not find a way to do it. And you need to be able to do a question in 2 minutes, let alone, however much time you have to be pensive about it. So